Welcome to partialarc.com. Don't do that.
I'm here to save the day. I'm here to save the day.
Soon I will be invincible. Because comics. Welcome to Because Comics. This is episode 21. I'm your host, Jay Jones, and I'm joined by my co-host, the indescribable Mike Christensen.
That's right. I cannot possibly be described by any words. You've definitely used indescribable before. You absolutely have. I don't remember what episode, but I know I've been...
You sure I've used indescribable before?
You failed to describe me almost every episode.
I can't describe... That doesn't even work at all.
Not even a little
I tried to recover from it, and I just tripped and fell further into the grave.
The problem was you couldn't think of any more words for me. And
I couldn't.
Jay?
Yeah, because you are indescribable.
Got it in one.
I imagine the people, when you go through airports, TSA just is really problem.
Well, first of all, why are people describing me to the TSA? What am I doing? I actually was on a no-fly list for a while because someone with the same name as me or a similar enough name as me.
As we're saying this, just like FBI agents are storming.
I was like 12, and every time I would get pulled out of line, and they had to, at some point they had to stop and be like, okay, someone with a similar name to you is on a no-fly list. We have to just clear you or it's going to keep happening.
There is a great pitch behind the phrase, I was a 12-year-old and I was on a no-fly list.
It is.
That's a pretty great, that's the best story opener ever. It's like, what happened?
I don't know. Well, eventually they figured out that I wasn't that guy.
You weren't the international, renowned 12-year-old terrorist?
Michelle Christensen, the French international arms dealer.
You weren't Damien from, you weren't Talia's son, essentially.
Exactly.
Because that guy would be on a no-fly list.
He's on all of them.
Yeah, essentially. But he's got giant flying bats, so
we digress.
Since we've gone as far as we can with this,
I think that joke's done.
I think it's done. I think we've killed it. Let's bury it.
Every episode we talk about what comics are on our pull lists. Jay, what are you reading? What should we be reading?
Well, on my pull list for this episode is AntMan #1. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, Ant-Man has been in the news stratosphere over the last month or so because the trailer dropped a little while ago. Mm-hmm. It's this weird film coming out in the summer, and obviously Marvel took the occasion to be like, wow, we should release a comic about this movie that's going to happen.
As you do.
Exactly. And because some people are familiar with the character, maybe Ant-Man, specifically related to Hank Pym, but not a lot of people are close to understanding it in relation to Scott Lang, which is the new Ant-Man, played by Paul Rudd in the film. Mm-hmm. I wasn't. I'm much more familiar with the old Ant-Man, who became Yellow Jacket, who became Giant Man, I believe, and then he was also a zombie in that one Halloween episode we talked about.
All of these things are true.
All of these things. He also has some really wonderful, colorful history, which we won't get into. But anyways...
We will... But not today. But Scott Lang is the new Ant-Man, and going to be the new Ant-Man in the film. Well, relatively new. There's been Ant-Man since him, but he's the current Ant-Man again.
He's the current Ant-Man back. So in this comic, they are basically reintroducing the audience and us to, hey, there's this guy Ant-Man, these are his powers, and this is the guy, Scott Lang. You might have known about Hank Pym, but forget about him, it's Scott Lang now. So the comic's really interesting because it's just only so far that I've read in the time of the recording of this episode was one issue, first issue out. And this issue is packed with narrative. It's like I got to the end of it and I was like, how many pages was this? It felt like it was like a graphic novel condensed into one issue.
Really?
It goes through many, many arcs for Scott Lang, basically setting up the new status quo of where he's going to be and what he's going to essentially be dealing with during his run for this Ant-Man run. And it's pretty fun. I mean,
who's the writer?
The writer is Nick Spencer and the artist is Ramon Rosanas. Now, Nick Spencer I've talked about before with Superior Foes of Spider-Man. Very, very funny.
He's great.
Lends very, very well to Scott Lang's character, basically taking that kind of wisecracking, not as much of a jerk as Boomerang is in Superior Foes of Spider-Man, but still very, jokester, pop culture references, things like that with Scott Lang. But it's a really entertaining comic. It really drops you right into, if you have no idea who Scott Lang is, if you have no idea even about Ant-Man, it drops you in really nicely, hey, I have these powers, and I do these things with ants, and I love my daughter, and all these kinds of things.
It's funny, too, that they're dropping this comic now when the trailer's announced, because a lot of times what they'll wait and do is start these comics around when the movie comes out.
Right.
And that's frustrating for someone coming in because you're just picking up one issue. Mm-hmm. If this holds, the movie comes out July, August, something like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly when.
Oh, later in the summer for sure.
Yeah, and so by the time it comes out, there will be a trade of AntMan comics, the first 5 or 6
There'll
or
be
something.
a whole story arc
Which
going
makes a
into
lot of sense, and basically someone can come into a comic book store. I don't know how much this actually happens, but I have seen some people go in and say, I saw this Ant-Man movie, and hopefully I enjoyed it quite a bit. Let me read some Ant-Man
Let me
comics.
pick up on my Ant-Man lore.
And you can just hand them this, because sometimes that's not possible. It's like, here's a new first issue of an Iron Man comic, come back in a month for part 2.
Right.
Well, okay, I won't do that. I mean, I might, but
chances
like,
are
I will.
Right.
But
I will as well.
But not everyone
Not
does.
everyone. They want to just pull it in bulk. I mean, in this day and age where we like to binge watch our TV, that's why everybody loves those Netflix shows. Same way with comics. You know, it's nice to be able to walk into a store and just pick up a whole trade, essentially, a whole graphic novel, bulk-wise, of a story.
Similar to what they did with Guardians when that was coming out, they sort of relaunched the team with that
Right
lineup
before it, yeah. You
a
can see
bit
it
in
like
advance.
6 months before it was coming out. This is very much in that same style.
Yeah.
So guys, if you don't know anything about Scott Lang, if you don't know anything about Ant-Man, it's really fun. I don't want to get into the story, really, but it does a really great way of testing how Ant-Man's abilities can be pretty useful in not only super heroics, but also in what probably this film is going to be like, kind of like a heisty, like infiltrate kind of manner. And there's ants and stuff, so it's fun, and the writing's hilarious because Nick Spencer's great.
And I'm assuming it's got kind of that Hawkeye-ish vibe, the She-Hulk vibe that most Marvel Now comics have these days. Where it's a real back to basics, bare bones, take a look at what works, introduce new readers approach to these, not necessarily obscure, people know She-Hulk, but characters that have a harder time finding purchase on an ongoing series, I guess is the nicest way to say it.
Yeah, a lot of the comic dedicates time to Scott Lang and like his daughter and their relationship and like how he's doing. Like he even addresses in the comic, matter of fact, like he's like, there's a point in the comic where he's interviewing for a job. He's interviewing with the full Ant-Man outfit on, and he's like, I'm Ant-Man. No, I'm just kidding. I'm Scott Lang. And it's like, weren't you? It's like, yeah, I was dead. Like, he addresses it in the comic as well. So, like, it definitely has that, like, you know, meta referencing itself, and definitely exactly like you said, a very Hawkeye level.
Sounds like a lot of fun. I am meaning to pick that one up.
So that is Ant-Man 1. Mike, what's on your poll?
Well, my poll's interesting because this week I'm not talking about an ongoing series. I'm actually talking about some trades that have come out over the last couple of years. They're the tie-in comics to Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Ooh.
Because there have been comics coming out ever since the show went off the air in 2010, I believe, and taking place post the series.
Right.
For those who didn't know, the show, or maybe have only vaguely heard of it, Avatar: The Last Airbender was a show on Nickelodeon that was way better than it had any right to be. It was
way better.
A fantastic fantasy series that very quickly became about war and
friendship and like choosing family over friends, or choosing loyalty and purpose over family,
and destiny and honor. There was a lot of heavy stuff.
A lot of big questions and things were discussed and answered on that show,
and not always easy answers. It was a very mature show and very well done. And there was a sequel series which took place like 70 years later with a new Avatar. These comics only take place like 1 or 2 years after the series.
So it's picking up right after that show.
Fairly straightforward with the progression, and we can see them moving towards season 1 of Korra, as far as like we can see the beginnings of the founding of Republic City, or you know, so and such character opening a metal bending school and things like that. These things are starting to get to the point of familiarity, but it's really just, you know, cleanup efforts. Like, what is the first thing that happens is them dealing with all these cities that are taken over by the Fire Nation, and like what happens when a nation loses a war? Well, you send everyone home. Well, these cities have been taken over for 100 years, some of them.
Like this army occupying the space is not occupying it anymore. It is that city now.
It's not the army. It's citizens. It's people who've made their lives there for generations sometimes. That starts to get really tricky really quickly, and you have the Fire Lord and the Avatar, these friends, starting to get some tension over this real, legitimate political problem,
right?
With no right answer.
I mean, you have people. My parents grew up here, even.
Exactly, and that's the problem. Is what do you do when that situation arises? It's that kind of thing where you have the fun and you have the lightheartedness of the show still. It's very much still in that style, and it's written by Gene Luen Yang, but Bryan Konietzko and Michael DiMartino, the creators of the show, are definitely contributing to the story.
Oh, I'm sure.
And the art is by Gurihiru. It's a Japanese illustration team, and they just totally capture the cartoonish sort of vibe. That they get it exactly right. It
That's
needs
awesome.
to be, for a comic, it needs to be slightly different to capture the sort of kinetic energy, but they do a really great job. And you get to see these characters getting older, like they're finally, like Aang is actually, he's getting taller. He's starting to reach Katara's height, and Toph's starting to grow. Only 112 years. Finally, the dude, it's time for him to grow a little bit. But it's interesting, and then they start dealing with other big hanging questions. The big one left at the end of the season was, what happened to Zuko's mom?
Right.
And that's what the second book is all
They
about.
actually address it?
It's all about that.
Oh,
And
fantastic.
then that's also not just the end. They've kept doing comics, continuing with...
Are they
this-
still releasing them even now?
They come out with another one every couple of months, I think, and then they release basically 3-part comics, and then they put them together into these huge, gorgeous hardcovers.
Excellent.
that
My
are-
coffee table doth be covered
Exactly.
in beautiful Avatar comics.
Exactly, and it's really cool just to see these characters just developing. So if you're a fan of the series, if I've just rewatched the whole thing with my roommate who had never seen it, and I made him watch all of it, and he...
I'm sure at a certain point you didn't need to make him watch
It didn't take very long.
No.
At a certain point, he would come home at like 10 a.m., be like, or 10 p.m.
He fights
At cer-
crime. Your roommate fights crime.
At a certain point, he would come home at like 10 p.m. and be like, let's watch some Avatar, and we'd burn through a whole disc.
Wow.
It was a bad idea. I work in the mornings. It's not smart. He works in the afternoon, but I work in the morning.
I can totally do this till 3. This was a terrible idea.
But it's a great show, and so if you don't know the show, definitely give it a try. And if you do know the show and you haven't checked out the comics, definitely check out the 3 gorgeous hardcovers. It's The Promise,
Okay.
The Search, and The Rift.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, those sound great and will be excellent additions to a massive, massive coffee table that I will now have to purchase.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I know your coffee table is not large enough.
No,
for
it's
that.
not. It's very tiny. It fits only coffee. But that was an awesome pull, and guys, that's going to be taking us right into our main segment.
The Devil and Lois Lane. Guys, today we're talking about an issue of Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane from 1963. This is actually from issue 41, although it's also reprinted in number 86, the 80-page giant, the all-wedding issue, and it's called The Devil and Lois Lane. You looked very confused.
Yes.
There's a reason I chose to do this only 2 months after One More Day.
We're on a bit of a run here, guys. We got to really dig in at this point.
We have to start with a disclaimer. The 60s were a different time.
They were.
We cannot look at this and think that anything in it is really okay. Like, any issue of Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane tends to be problematic.
Right.
So, there's the obvious ones, like the one where a laser turns her fat, or the
Okay.
one where Superman turns her into a black woman.
Oh, okay. Wait, what?
They are
Okay.
They are notorious.
We're going to keep those on the shelf over here.
They are notorious.
Wow.
But there's a lot of stories where, much like the Jimmy Olsen comics, Superman will do some dickish move and it'll turn out to be he's teaching her a lesson. Like, there's weird, mansplaining going on in 60s
clearly
comics.
Superman had a lot of free time and really just wanted to mess with his friends, clearly.
Really, it was just not okay.
Yeah,
It
no.
was just not all right.
No.
But you also get some very strange... Some of them are imaginary stories, like she marries Lex Luthor and they have a kid together.
Kind of like the stories we see now occasionally DC runs that are like the what ifs or something like that.
Yeah, they used to be much more common. Imaginary stories would happen all the time.
Yeah.
This is not an imaginary story.
So this is actually canon.
Well, maybe not now, but it was.
Right. And of course, this is perfectly timed coming up to the wonderful romantic time of year known as Valentine's Day.
That's right, guys. This is our Valentine's Day episode.
What could be better than talking about, Superman's girlfriend?
Anyway, all these comics, all the Superman's girlfriend comics, are about Lois pining for Superman and trying to get him in some way. So, like in one story, he flips a coin to choose between Lana Lang and Lois Lane.
That's a good way to decide who you're going to date.
In another, Lois puts on a blonde wig and pretends to be somebody else. I just skimmed through that one, but Mr. Mxyzptlk is in it.
Oh, great.
For some weird reason. And in another, she marries Clark Kent instead of Superman.
But he's not Superman when he's Clark Kent?
She does not, at no point during any of these comics does she ask, hey, Superman, who are you?
Who are you really? That's a story for another time, Lois.
But anyway, this comic's called The Devil and Lois Lane. And it opens with Jimmy and Lois. They've had a hard week investigating the disappearance of the Scarface Malone gang.
Ooh.
But, they've had a hard time investigating it. They haven't found Scarface Malone or his gang.
Even though with a scar-like face, he'd be pretty easy to pick out.
You'd think you'd
right?
find him in a lineup
Be like,
pretty
look,
easily.
right there, that guy with a giant scar on his face.
That's the one. But they're relaxing with a night at the opera. Lois got tickets from her college roommate, Lance Jason, who is...
That's a great name.
Yeah.
And, also a guy I immediately imagine, hi, Lance Jason.
Exactly. It's so perfect. But 60s, so mustache.
Ah, perfect. Even more so. You know what? That still fits.
But he's actually playing the role of Mephistopheles. So he is in full devil makeup, like the old school, not Victorian, but the old 1400s frilly sleeves,
right.
Mephistopheles character. So they're watching the play, and Faust sells his soul, and Mephistopheles summons Helen of Troy. It's the whole thing.
Yeah, that thing.
Yeah, the story. They go backstage after the show, and Lance says, so many times he thought that Lois would marry him in college, but he always suspected that she had some sort of secret romance, and she says, well, there has always been someone else for me. Then there's a fire backstage. It's one of the fuel tanks that Lance uses during his performance, during his act.
Which is good it happened after the show, because during the show, people would probably be like, oh, this is the thing, right?
Yeah, no one would have come to help.
Exactly. They'd be like, oh, excellent.
But
this is wonderful.
Yeah, it explodes, and Jimmy uses his signal watch to call Superman. We've talked about his signal watch on previous episodes. Superman comes by, he uses his super breath, blows out the fire, flies away. And Lois watches him leave and says, there he is, the man I love. After seeing your opera, I'd sell my soul to the devil for a chance to marry Superman. And Lance, who is still in devil makeup, twirls his mustache and says, I see. Who knows, my dear? The devil might consider that a good bargain.
What? So wait, are we insinuating that James Lance is in fact the devil?
Lance James. Sorry. No, Lance Jason, I'm sorry. He has the most bro name of all time.
My name is Lance Jason. So we're insinuating, essentially, that Lance Jason could in fact be the devil.
Well, I'll answer that question by progressing to the next scene.
Excellent.
Where Lois goes to her apartment and finds a fellow who looks very much like the devil in a modern-day tuxedo.
Okay.
He materializes in a puff of smoke. He calls himself Satan, Lucifer, Mephistopheles, one of many names.
Now that's not confirming just yet that he could be the devil.
He says he overheard her proposition, and he pulls out a contract. And she thinks, oh, yeah, it's Lance.
Now, is it a comically large contract? Like it rolls out onto the floor and has 15 attachments?
But it is amazing. The contract itself reads, and I'll get to actually that in just a minute. He says he's going to prove he's the devil, because she's like, I'm not convinced. And so he points to the fireplace, and it bursts into flames. And she says, all right, I'm convinced. And in her head, she thinks, yeah, now I'm sure it's Lance. As an actor, he probably mastered the tricks of magic. He must have done that stunt with some phosphorus powder. And she reads the contract. It says, the great ambition of my life is someday to be Superman's wife. If the devil helps me reach this goal, I, the undersigned, pledge my soul. Witness, Satan, Prince of Darkness.
That's amazing.
And she reads it and thinks...
And it rhymes.
She reads it and goes, in her mind, what amateurish poetry.
Wow.
She says...
Lois Lane, everybody, even burning the devil in her apartment, she even gets him to prove that he's the devil.
Exactly. But she just thinks that. She says, oh, yes, I'm convinced. Because she's playing along.
Even funnier, being sarcastic to the devil.
Yeah, but she says, do I have to sign in blood? And he says, no, ink's fine. We haven't used blood since the 15th century. She says, okay. And she signs it and says, okay, Lance, now cut the act. And the devil produces a tiny glass box who has 4 tiny gangsters inside. It's Scarface Malone and the rest of his missing goons. They traded their souls for $1 million, which he helped them steal from the bank, and then collected his fee as they counted their loot.
And their fee is them?
Their souls.
So their souls are in these tiny little boxes?
They are in these... They're all in one tiny little cube. It's like the size of the cube from Avengers.
Okay.
Except it's got 4 tiny dudes in it. Tiny dudes in little pinstripe suits.
Let me out!
It's exactly that.
That's amazing.
So, whoops.
Oh no.
Because she just signed a contract.
Turns out he's actually the devil.
So Lois says she thought this was a joke, but now that she knows, he's the devil, she wants the contract back, but he doesn't give it back, and he vanishes in another puff of smoke, and obviously she can't believe what she's done. But a few days later, she's just trying to put it out of her head and just, try to tell herself that she imagined it. She's flying a helicopter around an exploding volcano.
Totally normal.
For Lois, yeah, that's a Tuesday.
Absolutely.
She goes down, and she's actually doesn't have a photographer with her. She's just taking pictures herself. So she lands the helicopter. Now, she can fly a helicopter. Her dad was an army
right.
Her dad was a general, so she's grown up on army bases, so she knows how to fly any kind of...
Look, I'm fairly sure Lois Lane can pretty much do mostly anything.
I think that's fair.
I mean, like, really, I wouldn't be surprised.
That's true. I mean, you're Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane.
Right.
You have to know how to do stuff.
You've also been to, like, the craziest places on the planet. You've been to outer space. You've
For sure.
probably been back in time, hung out with monsters. I mean...
Inevitably.
At this point, her being able to fly a helicopter is probably the least surprising thing about her.
In this comic, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But she lands by the volcano, goes to take pictures of the lava flow, and the devil is standing there in the lava flow, and now he's in the full, like, red one-piece, horns, wings, pitchfork.
And when you say one piece, is it a onesie?
It is
It's actually in a big Long John's pajamas?
It's like a classic devil's costume. Like,
Gotcha.
it's got little red briefs over it.
That's pretty fantastic.
It's amazing. And he says, yes, I haven't forgotten the deal. Superman will be here any minute to propose to you. And she stumbles back, and the rocks collapse beneath her, and she falls, and Superman shows up and catches her, and goes, oh, good thing I was here and I caught you. Weird, there's a pitchfork in the rocks. And she's like, oh my gosh, the devil broke those rocks, knowing Superman would catch me. This is him, like...
setting them up,
setting the stage, exactly. And Superman says, that narrow escape made me realize how much I care for you, and he proposes, and she tells him, a sorcerer put a spell on you so that you would propose. And he says, Lois, I can't believe you would do such a thing. Now watch while I show you how much I love you. Like, completely unfazed by the fact that he is told his love is artificial, and says, I can't believe you. Like, why would you do that? Let me prove my love to you.
Yeah.
And then he carves, he does one of those hearts with the arrow through it.
Right.
But he burns it into the side of a rock with his heat vision.
Okay.
And inside he writes Superman. Well, the S symbol.
He writes just... Still not revealing he's Clark Kent.
S loves LL. Which, I made a list. That could mean Lois Lane, or...
Let's run through it.
Or Lana Lang.
Okay.
Or Lucy Lane, Lois's sister. Or Lex Luthor. Or Linda Lee, Supergirl's secret identity. Or Linda Lang, another of Supergirl's secret identities. Or Lena Luthor, Lex's sister.
Right.
Or Lara Lorvan, Superman's biological mother. Or Lori Lamaris, Superman's college sweetheart. Or Lightning Lad. Or Luma... you know what? No, screw it. That's way too ambiguous, Superman.
So Superman just leaves it fairly open that, like, I mean, this could be for you.
He's just gonna fly Lori back here at some point.
It's like the perfect tattoo. He can just get it, and then he never has to, like, oh no, this was for you the whole time.
He's hanging out with a legion of superheroes, and Lightning Lad is like, Superman? And Superman's like, well, buddy.
I've always wanted to tell you, I love how you run.
But Superman spots an emergency. He flies away, because these things happen when you're Superman.
Superman does those things.
And the devil shows up. As always, there's flames crackling around him. And Lois
He
tries...
must spend a lot of money on pyrotechnics.
Nothing burns, though. That's the nice thing.
That's
Everything,
true.
all of his suits are perfectly preserved. So
Yeah.
he's got... Whoever his tailor is immaculate.
He is quite good. I mean...
And Lois tries to say, it could have just been a coincidence that he happened to propose just now? Maybe?
Right?
Could be.
Right after you just said it?
And the devil says it was instant romance, a special service at no extra charge. If you want further proof, wait until Superman returns. I didn't mean for that to be a reference. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for that to sound like I was quoting the movie, but...
So that's why not a lot of people like that movie. It was fueled by devil power.
Superman flies back, and he seems shocked by this Valentine that he's carved on the rock. He's like, oh, I don't know what I was thinking, and he smashes it. He says, I must have been under red kryptonite when I carved it.
I would never love you, Lois.
I would never do this, and he flies away. And the devil reappears, and he's all smug, like, look what I did. And Lois is like, all right, so fine, you brainwashed him into withdrawing his proposal, but since he refused to marry me, our contract is broken. And the devil's like, no, your signature's binding. I'm going to deliver. Superman will propose again. So on the flight back home, the plane is, in a bit of turbulence, and Superman shows up and he blows the clouds away with his heat, with his super breath. And one of the passengers is like, I wonder, or no, Lois is like, I wonder if he knows I'm on the plane. And then he blows the clouds into the shape of a heart around the plane. And she's like, oh, well, yeah, I guess Probably.
Hey, when you're Superman, I guess you gotta do something with your time.
And as soon as they land, Superman's like, I'm sorry, I apologize for my behavior. He proposes again, and she accepts. She knows he can't help changing his mind.
Right.
He's at the mercy of Satan's diabolical powers.
Basically.
So she might as well go through with the marriage, and since she's doomed to end up in Satan's little box, she might as well enjoy a couple of years as Superman's wife. And she imagines herself, Superman and Lois standing on the porch. Again, not Clark, not some guy, Superman.
Just her and Superman hanging out.
Watching these two little toddlers fly around in tiny Superman costumes. Aww. It's really sweet, because...
I mean, she's really taking this glass half full. She could be really upset, but, She
has taken her lot in life. She made a horrible decision, she made a mistake, and she's going to live with the consequences.
Never trust a man named Lance Jason. A guy with 2 first names, never trust him.
So the next few days, she's getting ready for the wedding, and Lana